This episode is brought to you by Active Digital, connecting digital transformation to customer experience. Learn more at activedigital.com.
The flow and the math isn't wrong, right? Like these two are not diametrically opposed, right? It's not like, well, either the math's wrong and you need to worry about customer, or you need to forget about customer and only be math, right? These two play nicely together.
How do you make a customer-centric sales process that works hand in hand with marketing? Let's talk about that right now. Do you want to decommoditize your products and services? Do you want to become a destination brand, increase your revenue, and have more control over your pricing? You're in the right place. Each week, we'll talk about how to create great customer experiences and how to orient your company to enable them. We're your hosts, Devin and David, and this is the Experience Leader Podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the show. We are back talking again about sales, marketing, and how they work together to create great customer experience. I am so excited about being able to dive into this. I'm also excited about the fact that it's summertime. The kids are out of school. I don't have to get up and make lunches every day. How about you, David?
Last day is today for my crew, man. So, although you're a better parent than I am, I'm not the one making the lunches, so I won't even. I'll get in trouble if I say something recorded that makes it sound like I have any part in that process.
Well, I'm sorry.
I'm going to back away from that one before I admit to something that isn't true. I'm more of the early morning. I'm the prep guy, and then I get my butt out of the way. But nah, man, it's good for summer to be kicking in. A little bit of Memorial Day pool time. It feels like it's that time of the year, brother.
Yeah, man. I needed it, man. I needed it. So we're now to where Daddy's just making breakfast for himself and getting to work, and I like it this way.
Nice.
Well, we are talking today. We're continuing what we were talking about in our episode called Sales is from Marketing. Sales is from Mars. Marketing is from Venus. And we're going to get into where we left out. We left off at really wrapping up on marketing and getting into a little bit of sales. We're really going to talk today about how sales can work closely with marketing, but also orient itself around the customer. That's really the gist of all this, folks. Sales and marketing work great together when they are orbiting around the customer, when their target is the customer and not necessarily on just their incentives or just their tasks with their job, when they're looking at those things in the context of what it's doing for the customer. So I want to jump into kind of talking about these parts of the timeline, right? The customer journey. By the time they're talking to sales, they're really in the active looking phase. And that means that there could have been 80% of a process. We talked about it in the last episode on the topic. We talked about the fact that 80% of the process of buying can happen without any human contact. So today we know that sales is coming in. They've already researched the heck out of you, and they have formed a ton of opinions about your product, which is good. You're putting that stuff out there. You're working closely with marketing, and you've got content that they have soaked up, and now they're basically an expert on the product before they even talk to your salespeople. And now it's prime time. It's go time. And so, I think that one of the most important things here is for us to realize that we need to still ask questions, right? The customer has educated themselves a lot, but we still need to ask questions to make sure that we completely understand the job, right? That we understand the progress that they're trying to make. I'm curious, David, as you've gone through this process, especially in a B2B context, you are, we've both been in the sales side, in the B2B world. I'm curious, from your experience, once you get that first contact with the prospect, how often has it been for you that they have researched the heck out of you and are really trying to start from like square five where you were expecting square one?
I think it's a great question. This idea of options, I like that word in this context from the customer's perspective, right? From your prospect's perspective, because, it's important. Whether you're BDR, SDR, so, you're getting somebody who's kind of, to your point, right? They're now in that active looking stage. They have some opinions. Maybe they've done some research, or even, as an account exec, right? As somebody who's a little further downstream, but is still having these same types of conversations. I think the odds are that opinions have been formed, right? To your point. So the answer is that almost all of the time, there has been some research around their understanding of who you are as a company, the value that you can provide. The trickier part, or at least the added layer that then, you have to also be able to navigate appropriately, is that they're probably less interested in just the pure, what do you do? Why is that important, et cetera? And more about like, okay, well, now I believe that you can address this one problem that I'm having, or this one conversation that I need to have 2 weeks from now with my boss, right? So in other words, we talk about that as being progress, right? And so it's not just that they've done a bit of research and maybe have an opinion on you as a company, as a provider, but they also have already mapped that, at least in their heads, to how that may serve them in the journey that they're on. And so that happens pretty much every time, right? And so as somebody who's further downstream in sales, in other words, beyond marketing, beyond kind of that passive side of this, you have to be aware of that, right? You have to be aware of the fact that this person that you're talking to, they've already made some of those connections in their head, and they are coming into the conversation, whether that's the second one they're having or the fifth one, they're coming into that conversation with some predisposition, number one. And number two, they see a version of value that you cannot ignore if you want to be able to have a meaningful conversation with them.
Absolutely. That's great. And I think that being able to understand the context of, sort of the dots that they've connected by the time they talk to you, right? I love that you pointed out that they've not just formed opinions about the product. They've formed opinions about how it can help them, right? They've formed opinions about where you fit really in the competitive landscape, which it's always great to know that they've already sort of explored and they decided to talk to you anyway, right? So that, you getting the conversation is great. But when you're starting out, being able to hear from them, and this is kind of how I work, is I want them to tell me how they're thinking about the problem. I want to talk to them. I want to ask them, how are you thinking about the problem? What have you tried to do to solve it so far, right? You hopefully get a lot of stuff filled in on what was happening on your whole journey up to talking to me. That tells me the frame, the perspective with which I need to approach our conversation, and whether your idea of the problem needs to be shifted a little bit, maybe, or your idea of the solution needs to be shifted a little bit, or maybe we're not a good fit. What is your approach to kind of like finding out their framework, their frame of mind?
One of the things that you need to be able to do, and again, I think that there are different levels of this because of the depth of conversation that occurred, for sure, and what I'm about to say. But I do think that, whether you're a BDR, SDR, earlier stage in the process, or whether you're coming in as more of a pursuit scenario and things have been built up a little bit, this still applies. And that is that you do need to, like, one of the things that's important is to be able to separate out the organization's idea of competition within the marketplace from your customer's idea of competition and options. I think about right, wrong, or indifferent on how they've gone about it in the last decade, but Facebook in the early days were masters at this, not just from a B2C standpoint, but actually from a B2B standpoint, how they work through advertising contracts, right? So they took a look at, we're not competing against other social networks. That's not, frankly, if you're choosing kind of as a consumer, you're choosing to download the app and use it, or even as a business, you're choosing to maybe use us as a platform you might want to advertise on. You're not just kind of saying, well, we could go Twitter, we could go Facebook, we could go, et cetera, and we're definitely going to make a choice out of those couple. Really, what they recognize is we're competing for people's time. And that could be anything. That could be them watching a baseball game on TV, right? That could be anything. And so their value add was not that we're the best social network. They almost kind of left that as we are. But it was forget about, how you're going to position yourself again. If you're an advertiser, forget about how you're going to position yourself against your competition, and just understand that there is nowhere that's going to get as much eyeball time, right, as this platform. And so that's an example of understanding, even in the B2B scenario, that the people that you're talking to, if you just kind of only play up this like, well, the market looks like this, and this is why we're the best social network, like you're missing the point. Like the point is, your advertisers want to get in front of the right people at the right time. And if your whole value add is we literally just have more people more of the time, you win. And obviously that's again, forgetting about how they went about it and all that good stuff. They won, right? To that end. And so I think in sales, you always have to do that. You always have to think through, they don't care what you think the marketplace looks like. Okay, yeah, we have this product and there's these 4 competitors. What they're trying to figure out is, we currently have this solution that's made up of these 7 things. We're considering making a change, and we're trying to figure out like, how do we get from here to here? That's it, right? That is the, you talk about that struggling moment, right? But that is that piece that needs solved. They don't care about the competitive landscape. Certainly not the one that you put on your website that shows why you're, 3% better in these 4 areas.
Absolutely, man. That is so great. That is so great. That competitive set, that real competitive set, I know for me, whenever I'm buying anything, generally my competitive set is not, as you said, it's not the one that the company presents to me. Now, I will say, yes, I will, depending on what it is, maybe I'm thinking about buying one product and they're going to compare it against products from other people. Amazon does this.
No doubt.
Not even, they're comparing people who have products in their store, not, most of the time, not even their own stuff, right? Like they're comparing other stuff. That is moderately helpful. I will say moderately. Generally, what I find is that's only helpful within a very, very, very tight competitive set. When you start bridging companies, it generally, to me, is not as useful because when I think about products or services from different companies, they have different approaches. It's not a one-to-one comparison. And I always find that the trap that we can get ourselves in as businesses, trying to compare ourselves against our competitors as opposed to thinking from the customer standpoint of, hey, this is a problem I have. I'm trying to get from here to here, like you said. I am thinking about different things that solve the problem according to my framework. This other company who has the same product, who may say that they solve the same problem, I'm not necessarily thinking about them for X number of reasons. Maybe there's one, you don't even know there's one feature or there's some reason why I can't buy that product. You're not competing against them. You're competing against me in Facebook's instance. You're not competing against Twitter. You're competing against me going and advertising on TV. That's what you're competing against. I'm trying to figure out where the eyeballs are, which is great. That's, obviously the job there is get in front of eyeballs, right? Get in front of engaged eyeballs. And so I generally think that, as a salesperson, your first job, one, is to be able to understand how are they thinking about the problem? How have they thought about solving the problem? And then how to talk about your product or service in the context of their perspective on that problem and where they're trying to go.
Yeah. I mean, you nailed it. The context word is everything. So when you're in a situation where you have optionality, you generally have complexity, particularly you talk about B2B scenarios. Obviously, we would all love to reduce complexity in the sale. We would all love to reduce complexity for our customers in terms of how they think about their problem set and the solution. But particularly if you're going to be on the innovative side, if you're in digital at all right now, there are just too many options out there. And I'm not even talking about, choosing, okay, I need a vendor that does this thing, but it's never that, right? It's, well, we're most of the way there, but we're not all the way there. And we have this already going on and our org is structured in this way. And we tend to, think about budget in this way. And, you start layering all those things on top of each other. That is complexity, right? So when you have complexity and then you have a sea of options as to how to address that complexity, you have to then be able to bring that back to, that word you use, which is context. In the midst of all that complexity, in the midst of all the options they have to further themselves along the path that they're on, how are you going to find the right context as somebody who's having that conversation on the, on the sales side of the house to really be able to say, okay, I understand. I understand where you are. And I even understand the options that you have in front of you, some of which may involve buying something new or engaging with a new service. And some of it may be sticking with what you have and making changes there, right? It's any number of options, but those are the conversations then that sales folks need to be able to, they need to be able to have that conversation, which means they need to be able to recognize that upfront.
Right. Yeah. And I think that, and we warned y'all that there's a ton of overlap here, right? Between sales and marketing, ton of overlap. You're hoping that you're coming into this conversation with the customer having been exposed to, the awesome content that marketing's been putting out to even frame the way that the customer thinks about it and thinks about the context of their problem, thinks about the trade-offs that they might have to make. You're hoping that you're coming into this with that sort of leg up. And I know all the salespeople said amen. They always want marketing to give them, grease the skids more for them. Having been both in sales and marketing, 100% agree. When I was in marketing, my word to sales and the CEO was always, my job is to make sales job easier, to grease the skids for sales. And when I was in sales, I was always hoping that marketing was making my job easier. But there's overlap here, right? When you're talking about helping somebody think about their problem, you're starting to understand context. Once you get to understanding that context, then you can get into understanding the trade-offs that the customer has to make, right? They're in the process of making a decision, and the salesperson having that contact is, I kind of think of the primary job is to help them understand what you have to offer, but help them to make trade-offs. And when they see that you've got their best interests in mind, that you're helping them make the trade-offs that are the absolute best choice for them in their specific context, that is generally, in my opinion, how you build trust. We live in a world of trade-offs, right? And that's what they're trying to do.
Yeah, I mean, look at an area where so much money has been spent in the last, well, certainly 5 years, but really, going back probably closer to a decade at this point. And that's in the cloud space, right? So the big players, Amazon, obviously, Microsoft, Google, their platforms, choices that nearly every company in the world at this point is having to make around, okay, we're being told that we need to, quote unquote, move to the cloud. And that's something we should probably do. Now, that statement doesn't actually mean anything, right? Because it's like, well, move what to which cloud, right? So what are you moving and where are you moving it to? Like, just to be super basic, like if you can't answer those two questions, then moving to the cloud doesn't really mean a whole lot. And so you're exactly right on the trade-off side, because what you then end up having to decide as a buyer, right, with these major options out there, and then you have service providers that are sitting in between, and there are all these layers. There's optionality. Again, back to that, right? There is some complexity here, but it's like, okay, well, are we moving everything to the cloud? Are we moving some of the applications and data, et cetera, that we have? Are we actually going to be the ones that ride it out and say, no, we're not doing that yet? Maybe 5 years from now, and so. It is when you talk about trust and you talk about as a vendor, whether you're on the service side or whether, you're at one of those major providers. If you just kind of, bang your fist on the table and say, we're better, you should use us. We're 75% ahead of where these guys are right now, or they have less adoption, or, and you just keep yelling those same words and offering up discounts and, whatever else you're trying to do to force them to buy. You're missing the point, right? The point is that organization needs to make a decision as to, well, why are we even moving in the first place? What's the right plan for us to get there technically, right? And organizationally, what are we impacting? Are we messing with our customers by doing this? Are we opening ourselves up to risk or regulatory problems that we need to solve? Those are all the trade-offs then that buyer is going to have to consider. And if you recognize that, as you're talking them through the process of using, it doesn't matter, AWS, GCP, Azure, any of the options, that trust is going to start to build. So when they get to the point where they say, okay, yeah, we're ready to start at least with phase one, now they're looking at you a little bit differently than maybe the other two faceless options that they have, right? Which are purely technical. And frankly, that difference doesn't mean as much at that point. So it definitely comes back to that concept of, or that topic of allowing and helping your customer to see the trade-offs that they're making. There is no one solution most of the time. There are many. So what are the trade-offs? How does that actually impact your customer's customers and their business, right? And then how do you align what it is that you think is best for them with your product or service with the value that they're seeking to achieve, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely, man. And I think that the more you can help somebody think about that stuff, again, we're talking about helping people buy, right? We're helping them buy. The more you can help them think through that stuff in a way that it's clear to them, you're not just trying to make numbers off of them no matter what. If they know you're saying, hey, it sounds like you're considering going to the cloud versus doing nothing. How long can we survive with doing nothing, right? I've been on the buy side, right? I've been on the product side thinking about, okay, how long can we survive being on-prem?
Yeah.
And that being a very tough decision, right? But when somebody's talking to you and saying, well, you could survive another 2 years, maybe being on-prem. It's going to be painful probably for these things, but it'll save you some immediate pain, with the roadmap that you have. And somebody talking through that with me and being honest, because I know I'm able to compare paths once I get enough information to know that, like, if you're telling me I got to go to cloud right now, and I know that I don't, like, I have enough information now to know that I don't need to go to the cloud right this minute, but I might still do that. I just want to know, what are the ramifications and what are the potential benefits of me deciding to deal with the pain now versus later. So that's the thing that I think winds up winning trust. And essentially, like I said, you're helping somebody to make the right buying decision. And I think that you're getting from being in the spot of, hey, buy my product, to, hey, I know that you've got this thing going on. Here is what I think you should do based on your information. And sometimes that's going to be like, doesn't sound like right now is the right time. The level of trust goes way up when somebody sees that you said something that they would think is not in your best interest, but it always is, right? It always is in your best interest to really just tell them the truth.
It is. And that part of that too speaks to culture and leadership that goes beyond the sales organization as well, right? Because the truth is, the customer that you just described, if you took the other approach, right? Maybe the more traditional sales approach of, okay, like, we probably know that they're 2 years out, but we're going to, through discounts and whatever else, we're going to find a way to just force them onto the platform now, or we're going to force them to buy our services now, whatever that might be. Those are expensive customers, because the next 2 years that you probably should have waited are going to be rough. Now, they might not be rough for the sales team, to be fair. They might, right? Just depends on how the AE structure is set up and all the rest. Definitely going to be rough on the customer service team. You can go ahead and kiss that, extension or re-up goodbye, right, that you were planning on. And so those are expensive decisions for the business. So then the question is always, okay, so how do we make sure that sales, or the sales process even, right, trying to remove this a little bit from like a team really having everything and thinking about it more of that customer was a customer when marketing was talking to them, and they're a customer when it's client services and customer success that are really hand in hand with them, right? But it's like, okay, so how do we align that such that certain things, are for the business are achieved, and that becomes a part of what we consider to be success, right, as a company? Because you said it's not just, yes, it's the right thing to do. Yes, sometimes actually that trust factor is what gets you the sale. To be fair, that does happen sometimes. But you can get the sale sometimes without it. It's just, how much is that customer going to cost you over the next, life of that contract? It's generally not pretty, right?
Absolutely. That's exactly what I was thinking about. That's why I have you on the show, man, because you get it. That's exactly where my head was going is, you can get the sale right now. That customer is going to be difficult because you brought them into something. Maybe it wasn't the right moment, or it wasn't maybe the right tier, the right product level. Maybe it was that decision. And
one thing I'll throw in here, because this is something that I've struggled with, because I so firmly believe everything that we're talking about, but I've been in the machine too, and I know what that looks like and feels like. And we talked about this a little bit on the previous episode too, on the marketing side too, right? Where it's like the numbers, the flow and the math isn't wrong, right? Like these two are not diametrically opposed, right? It's not like, well, either the math's wrong and you need to worry about customer, or you need to forget about customer and only be math, right? These two play nicely together. But I will say one of the things that I have struggled with at times, certainly in the past, is particularly early stage. How do you actually get the intel that is needed to know when a customer is the right kind of customer, to know that you're even interpreting all the stuff we're talking about, right? Optionality, context, direction on trade-offs, all these things. Like for a mature company, those things should actually be baked in and you can really roll with it, right? And I think a lot of the stuff we're talking about, frankly, should just be normal course of action. And you can, oddly enough, you can actually afford to be more picky as you go along because you have that in your back pocket. Early stage, I think one of the things that I've struggled with, though, is like, yeah, but I don't want to make it about the numbers, the number of conversations, the number of whatever, but I kind of need those conversations to get the intel to then be able to be smarter for my next batch of 50 that I talk to, And so I'll just say this from my personal perspective. One of the things that I definitely have taken solace in and really leaned into in terms of, yeah, this is how those worlds coexist and frankly build each other up, is that you always want to be making assertions about all of these things, right? What options are in the market? What again, like just like you're trying to help your customer with their customers, you also need to understand who you're talking to and what their journey looks like and what their pain points are. So you're always making assertions in those areas, and you want to make those known to your sales team all the time. So you could be a day two company. You want to make those assertions known. This is what we think we're dealing with right now, right? And why we think our value is going to play here, et cetera. Make those known. Entice folks to have the types of conversations that build upon or challenge those assertions, right? Which means, yeah, you got to go out and have conversations straight up. You can't just sit there and wait for someone to dial in. It's not going to happen, right? As good as you think your marketing is, et cetera, right? But then be willing to tighten on those assertions to the point where you get so good at the stuff that we're talking about right now that then you're playing with house money, right? Because you can be so good as a sales team with navigating trade-offs and thinking about the options that are available and really applying the customer's context. You can get there pretty quickly if you're willing as an organization to keep tightening and reframing what those assertions are about your customer base. We talked about jobs to be done as being a great framework for doing this. But it's like, you have to revisit it, And so I wanted to throw that out there because it's something I've struggled with where I'm like, all right, I believe all this, but man, like I just feel like I need to go have some conversations, And my experience is that you do, but have them and then pull that back into the feedback loop. Reset, go again, right? Keep that going.
I love that. And being able to adjust as an organization to the reality on the ground is absolutely dependent on that feedback loop. It's dependent on that feedback loop. And I think that I've seen it happen many different ways. The best teams are doing that for each other constantly. They're giving information from the feedback loop, honing in on sales and marketing here. Marketing's giving sales information from the feedback loop. We're getting a ton of engagement. We're getting a ton of response when we talk about the problem this way, or when we use this language, when we bring up this thing, this benefit, et cetera. Sales knowing that going in is very helpful. Vice versa, sales giving the feedback to marketing. Hey, this fell super flat when we said this. We know we thought, like, we were all in the conference room, we thought this was hot stuff. When we said that, 5 times it fell flat. It's not a thing. We need to go back to the drawing board. Or, hey, that wasn't a thing. This other thing that we said was, like, let's work that into the campaigns.
That is particularly challenging when you think you got to win and then you don't, right? So marketing's like, we know this is going to play. They run that campaign. It does play. And sales, again, back to if they're thinking the way that we think about customer and what it means to provide value and not just trying to convert at all odds or in all scenarios. And sales comes back and says, listen, like, volume was great. Like, I'm glad that campaign worked. Those are not the right customers for us. We cannot provide value to this. So we nailed it in terms of passive interests. We got people thinking. We, from an AdWords perspective, we got we got all the engagement that we expected, but those were not the right customers for us. However, you can't stop there. Here's why. here were the two things we were expecting from those conversations, and they never happened. So next time, like, how do we map those two things into the ads that are playing? And let's now, like, let's recalibrate a little bit, right? Maybe instead of taking the top two options that were, hey, these are pretty low cost per click, and but it seems like there's a lot of interest. Like, instead of taking the top two on our list, let's go down to options like 7 and 8, because those are still high. So we still think we're going to play the way we want to, but it's also way more likely that those people, those customers, have the problem sets that are going to also allow us to help them navigate downstream, right? And that communication is where you get good, right? Because it's not just like marketing is like, I don't get it. We picked the top two options. The metrics all lined up. Why didn't you guys close? And sales is saying you give us crappy leads. Like, well, okay, but what are you going to do about it? Right. Well, what you're going to do about it is think about that a little bit. Right. And on the sales side, same thing. Right. You're going to take some of that feedback and say, maybe we're picking up the wrong problem set. Like, maybe we should be picking it at our choice number 3 instead of choice number 1, because it's just more germane to what people are interested in right now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And being able to do that, to work together, is really it's the gist of all of this, right? Is to be able to work hand in hand and not just function off of, kind of that, the age old, like, hey, you guys didn't close. And then, sales being like, hey, well, you gave us crappy leads. Like, you got to move past that. I love that. And I love, again, the thing that you brought up of, the broader leadership context of these things, of giving sales and marketing the ability to have those conversations and to adjust and pivot. They have to have the leeway organizationally of the imperatives that they're given. You've got to work with them to make sure that they can make adjustments along the way, because everybody wants to win, right? Everybody wants to win. And I think sometimes our hands can be tied by various things. We can be in leadership and we can be tying sales and marketing's hand by giving certain imperatives that doesn't really give them the freedom to keep their job and make the adjustments that they need to make, or, the way that it looks, or not know that they can come back and say, hey guys, like, I don't think this works. A lot of folks might not really go that route. Hopefully good leaders will challenge you, and you being a good leader will accept being challenged. But that broader context, that point that you made there is so important, that you have to set the environment to allow these teams to have the autonomy to make adjustments to actually help customers and therefore make sales. And I think that all of this, right, all of this leads to a virtuous cycle, really. All of this leads to a virtuous cycle. If you are doing these things, you're helping the customer think about their trade-offs. You're helping them to make the right decision for them and their context. They're going to recognize that. Like we talked about, somebody being brought on because you were trying to make numbers and you sold it to them even though it wasn't the right fit. The other side of that is you did sell them the right thing, whether that was right then or they came back in a couple of months, what have you. Then that customer, tons of trust built up there. That customer is not just going to want to buy from you just one time, most likely, because it takes time to build trust. It takes time for a customer. All of us buy, right? All of us know how hard it is to find the right product, the right service. We don't want to have to do that every time. If I can just buy from the same person again, I want to do that. And that virtuous cycle is yours if you do the right things along the marketing and sales pipeline.
Yeah, man. We talk about frictionless buying experiences, but there's also, from the seller side, there's frictionless selling, or at least, the objective of frictionless selling. And that cannot be done in a vacuum, right? So you can call it selling, you can call it marketing, you can call it whatever you want, but it's not just the sales team or the marketing team or executives that get involved in the pursuit process or anything else, right? If you want to have the ability from a supply side, if you want the ability for that to feel frictionless, meaning all this stuff that we've been talking about is really at your fingertips. The team is empowered to act on those things. The customer is feeling what you're describing, right? Which is they're feeling that trust. They're feeling the value. Then when you talk about land, expand, all that good stuff. So how do you keep accounts as partners, moving forward? That almost solves itself. B, from a brand equity perspective, in whatever marketplace you're serving, that only ups the equity of your brand, right? Your reputation starts to be one of, hey, like we needed this, and these folks provided it, and we're not leaving. We've been here for a year or 10 years or whatever it is, but we have no intention of dropping them because they give us what we need, and they help us to do this one thing or these 5 things the way we need to. That is, not only for the organization, but frankly for folks that are in sales, that are in marketing, that's utopia, right? Because now that job that you had that felt like such a slog maybe for a little while when things were getting rolling, of like, man, it's like I'm always introducing who we are, and I'm always having to fight against like, these same 3 objections. And I just wish that I could eventually, you do this stuff, that virtuous cycle also strips away a lot of that, right? I had a friend was a sales exec at Splunk when they're still doing well, but when that product was such a no-brainer with no competition that literally it was at the point where, and you just walk in and people are just like, how much is that thing that we need? Like every tech shop in every big company in the world was like, we need that, right? For all the reasons that they did. And, it was, that doesn't happen overnight though. Like, yes, the technology was innovative and it was great, and it does certain things that are necessary, but there were other options. And even if there weren't, there were people don't just suddenly get it, but over time they had positioned themselves so well, not only with the brand, but also in how they were servicing their customers, et cetera, that it was actually really fun to be a part of the sales team and the marketing team and at that company. And you earn that. You earn that by understanding this stuff, putting it into action, and frankly, then letting the market work to your advantage, right? Versus having to just keep pushing the boulder up the hill. You want to get on the other side of that hill where it's like, man, I feel like we're just riding this baby down at this point.
Absolutely, man. The compounding effect, I'll call it, of a great brand, of brand equity. That's when I view marketing as really nailing its job, because once you've achieved that, people take your calls, right? Getting somebody to take the call is easier. Getting somebody to even put you in the conversation is easier. You can think about this in B2C and B2B contexts. When you're thinking about somebody buying a car, right? If they're looking for an SUV, they're, depending on the tier you're buying in, there are certain brands they're going to be in the conversation. And you're thinking, okay, like, if you're talking about an SUV, that, for instance, Lexus is going to be in the conversation, or if you're a mom with several kids, like Chevy's going to be in the conversation, right? It's always going to be in the conversation, because they've got the brand equity. It's not hard for the Tahoe or the Suburban to wind up, being in the competitive set. Likewise, on the B2B side, I can think of, you're thinking about services. On the services side, people know you. They know what you've done for other companies. When there's an RFP, when there's a search firm that's helping you with an RFP, your name is usually on that list because of your reputation. And everybody knows when they're competing against you, they're like, crap. we're competing against X firm. Everybody knows that they're the favorite. If they're in the race, they're the favorite. Dang it,
No doubt. And particularly if they're in the race and the context is X, then they cannot be beaten, right? And when your customers are bringing to you problems that are so squarely in your wheelhouse because you've established frankly, just a track record of delivering, within that wheelhouse, that's when, frankly, a lot of the stuff we just talked about, it almost just happens, right? You still, that mindset can never go away. The execution certainly cannot go away, but that's what you're working towards, right? Yeah, this isn't, that's the good news about this stuff, is that it's not transactional. It's not like, well, just work harder at this and you'll get a little bit better. There really is an exponential value to doing this as a sales team, as a marketing team. It's not just we can improve our metrics by 25% or, whatever that might be. You're going to see compounding effects that, when you get a few years in, it's like, we're playing a different game altogether, right? That's how far we've leveled up on this.
Right. And you can get to the point where you're kind of setting the rules of the game. There's a certain point where everybody starts to be compared against you. You set the bar and everybody's compared against you, right? We can all think of companies and brands, where everybody has to measure up to your legacy, right?
No doubt.
And obviously that's the promised land we all want to get to, right? That's where we all want to get to. Like you said, doesn't happen overnight, but it does come from executing, doing all the right things over and over and over again. Keeping that attitude is how you stay in front. And obviously that is the crux of the whole thesis of the show, right? Being an experienced leader means that you recognize that leading with the customer experience means that one, you can get in that spot, but two, you can stay in that spot. So obviously we've covered a lot of things here. Key takeaways: make sure that you are in that phase where the customer's coming to you, they're ready to make decisions. You understand context. Make sure that you've got the ability to help them make trade-offs the right way, and have the feedback loop. Have the feedback loop to make sure that you're adjusting, that you guys are working closely together. Lead your teams in a way that allows them to make those decisions, and you will win. Folks, thank you so much for joining. We are not going to stop here. We actually have another episode coming up where we're going to talk to the author of Demand Side Sales and go in deep on how he came up with this framework, this timeline that we use that we think works so well. So thanks for listening, folks, and keep outserving your competition on your relentless pursuit to become an experienced leader. Catch you in the next one.